So today we are going to meet up with my speaking coach, and as a professional speaker, it's really good to have a coach and really good to evaluate what's coming out of my mouth and how it's coming out of my mouth and the whole presentation, because it's so easy to get caught up in a rut and do the same old thing. Like sometimes I feel like even when I try to vary things up, it's the same old presentation. So I'm hoping today to gain some new insight into things that I can improve to make it more effective. And, it's going to make it better for the audience and it's going to make it better for me. So it's a real win. So I'm super excited and hope everything turns out okay. So Paul, I just want to tell you that I have an introduction to my speech that is a nice piece of bread with some olive oil on it.
Building the sandwich. Good.
And I used a personal story in there to connect people to the content, and we give them all my content. But now, this is the part I'm nervous about, the closing part of my presentation. Now, typically what I have been doing in the closing, keep in mind I talk about mental health, I sort of end on a personal note, and I've been talking about emotions, the most difficult emotions that are out there. And I tell the people something like, see, this is how unorganized I am with it. You get to see it right here. I typically talk about myself and say, in closing, I want to give you something that I think will be the one thing that you need to take away if you take away nothing else from this presentation. And I talk about my work with John Terrell, a therapist I've been working with, and I've learned so much from about difficult emotions. Because as humans, we struggle with the most difficult emotions. We don't know what to do with them. And that results not only in mental health challenges, but other types of self-destructive behavior. Mm-hmm. And those are anger, grief, and fear. And I share about how each one can really cause problems for us, but they can also be great assets. And I end with the presentation basically encouraging them to embrace those difficult emotions and to sit with them. And then I simply say, slowly, thank you for your time, thank you for your trust, and thank you for listening to me today.
From what you've described, your presentation ends on a lull. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it really needs to end on a lull if that's what the event requires, and if that's what the audience is expecting.
So I want to be transparent with you and say that I think they're not expecting that. They want it to end on a
climactic, high, rah-rah sort of moment.
How do I craft that piece of bread?
I think you've given yourself some really good meaty bits, the sandwich, right? Part of all this, constructing this story, constructing this sandwich, okay? You have given yourself an opportunity to inspire this audience. And you're an author, and you wrote a book about mental wellness and superheroes. Did you not?
I did, yes.
I read it.
Oh.
You're invoking some of that hero lurks in the shadows, paying attention to the things that we may not be paying attention to as lay citizens of this city, right? Mm-hmm. And this idea of a hero that struggles, right, is what I have, are my skills, is how I think, my powers. Are these gifts, or are these the opposite of gifts? Are these damning personality traits? Mm. Do I use these things that I've learned with these difficult circumstances that I've undergone, right? Superheroes go through gamma radiation experiments, tragic moments in their lives, intervening alien spaceships come into their lives somehow, right? And they're bestowed upon these gifts, these powers, but they don't always know what to do with those things, right? So if you're going to end your story on this lull, you talk about anger, fear, anxieties, these angsts, right? And getting your audience to think of these things differently. You may want to start ramping up that superhero image a little more.
I think I got it. X-Men.
Exactly.
And in the story, or many of the storylines of X-Men, you have these mutants, they're called, people with some unique gifts that seem like liabilities. And they end up going to this, I don't know, place with a doctor that helps them, use them as assets, or learn to use them as assets.
Training themselves to use them as assets.
And maybe an idea that I'm having is maybe actually having a quick summary story without saying the name X-Men of, there's a story of some people who had some struggles and they went into blah, 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 and those are the X-Men.
Exactly. And I think what that does is it can be a lulled moment where you're getting the audience to think, maybe even emotionally, about these challenges. But if you can frame it, because it is the concluding part of your presentation, right? You do want to set them off and walk them off into the sunset feeling inspired, right? As opposed to lulled, right?
Yeah.
I think there's a thin veil there, and it's a good thin veil to start talking about X-Men or some of the DC characters, right? Their backstories, without the context of naming them Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, Iron Man, Doctor Strange, or whatever, right? All these characters that we all know. I mean, the Marvel movies are all over the place, right? They only made 37 million movies, right? I think that also, in terms of concluding, right, and finding the best combination of ingredients for that last snacky bit, right, is you're talking about your own journey, but you're giving them a general societal pop culture reference for them to fly out of there, right, to go fight their own battles against stigma, whether it's in their own personal lives or in a clinical practice, right, maybe shifting the way they think about their patients, right, not patient X54, but Bob, Sally, Jim, right? Maybe a different twist on how we think of things. If we're thinking of people who struggle with mental illnesses or substance use disorders, or there's some sort of trauma in their life, but we think of them as heroic traits.
Yes.
And you tell them a heroic story that they all go, yeah, that makes sense. And then they realize, it's Black Widow's story, or it's the Hulk's story. It's going to be a very powerful ending.
I got to be honest with you, in 10 years of speaking, this is the first time I've felt excited about the conclusion of my presentation.
Good.
And I'm super excited to craft it. Thank you so much for these tips.
Sure.
This really helped me a lot.
My pleasure.